Okay, this should be the last video. So this is part 3 on President Jimmy Carter's legacy on mental health law reform. So, like I mentioned, we've been reading this article by actually a student. It's really impressive. And we've been talking about the Mental Health Systems Act of 1980 that President Carter put into law and that was repealed less than a year after it was put into law. Okay. At the very end, this article says, when the Mental Health Systems Act of 1980 came into effect, it had the chance to be an important step forward in mental health care in the United States. Instead, it was repealed too quickly to be tested long term. The effects of losing such an important mental health act are still showing strongly today in many communities, many of which still do not have sufficient access to mental health services. Those communities that are fortunate enough to have facilities are either lucky enough to have well-funded organizations providing care to those in need of services, or find themselves with institutions that lack proper funding, space, and sufficient staff to provide quality of care. And again, this article, that's the end of the article, it's by Catherine Bell. It's called The Mental Health Systems Act of 1980. And I just think it gives a really nice overview of that bill, a little bit of the context and history behind it, so that we all have a sense of like why it came about and how it came about, and how it could have been so important for our country. And just to add, when President Ronald Reagan came into office, he repealed most of the Mental Health Systems Act of 1980, except, and he did keep, and I will always credit him for this, the part about the patient's Bill of Rights. And that is something really, really, really important that our patients still have today. They have the right to file grievances. They have the right to a set list of rights. They have expectations from their treatment team. They have the right to get a copy of their treatment plans. All of those things were kept from Jimmy Carter's original law, and they passed the test through Ronald Reagan. And so I'm incredibly grateful for that. But I do think about the what could have beens. Like, what could have been had this law actually been able to go into effect and stay in effect. Basically, what he was doing was he took most of the funding that was going towards state hospitals at the time. So remember that during the 1960s and 1970s, the state hospitals are moving toward deinstitutionalization. So they're pretty quickly, phasing patients back into the community. So there's this realization that not everybody has to be in these extremely cumbersome, expensive facilities, but they could be better served in the community. And so the desire to move them into the community sounds great, but there was no funding for those intermediate facilities. And for people who had basically been in institutions for decades, it was really hard to go back to the community. And so the law that Jimmy Carter put into place was really very, very beautiful and well intentioned and well researched, and would have given a lot of the funding that was going to the state hospitals, would have funneled all of that into intermediate care facilities in the community, so that people could actually get treatment in less structured facilities, but they weren't completely thrown into the community like they eventually were. And as we know, without those intermediate supports, all those folks from institutions were left to go to the streets. And that's when we saw a sharp rise in homelessness. That's when we saw a sharp rise in incarceration. Even at the jail, there's sort of this revolving door of mental health folks going in and out of jails. We still see it today. We still see so many folks on the streets because there are no places for them to go. And I grieve what could have been. I grieve all of the facilities that could have been constructed with all of that money that just, it's not there. It was all funneled, I shouldn't say it was all, but a lot of it was funneled into other programs, into or into the war on drugs, and that didn't have a particularly good effect. And so I feel very strongly, and what I hope, when we lost President Jimmy Carter yesterday, what I hope people remember is isn't just his post-presidency work, which was very impressive. He was a very impressive post-presidency president. But what he did during office was also remarkable and could have been so great. It could have really set us up for some remarkable change and remarkable treatment for folks in the community. And the fact that we'll never know what could have been is really a tragedy. So, thank you, President Jimmy Carter, for all of your work during your presidency and after. Your legacy will not be forgotten. And I hope that we can bring back a similar law into existence that carries on your original legacy. All right. Thanks.